Welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm Cassie, and this is My Counselor Says. My Counselor Says is where you submit a question, either for yourself or for a friend, and one of our incredible therapists takes their time and answers your personal question. If you want to submit a question, you can do so using our webpage and then look for the answer in an upcoming edition of our weekly e-newsletter. So let's go find out what My Counselor says.
Hello, everyone. Hi and welcome. My name is Jesse Masson, and I'm one of the therapists here with MyCounselor.Online. Today, we've got a great question, and it comes from David, and he writes, "My wife thinks that I may be on the autism spectrum. We have been married for about 13 years. What test should I take to find out?" Great question, David. Let's go through it. A few things that we'll talk about today is what is the autism spectrum? What are some symptoms? Why is this some concern? How do I get tested or diagnosed? And what can be done? So, what is autism? Well, it's referred to as the ASD. ASD stands for the Autism Spectrum Disorder. And this now includes both autism and Asperger syndrome. The medical and mental health community have, in the last couple of years, have combined that to be on a synonymous scale, even though there's some great differences between those two and within each of those two. So let's talk about those symptoms. They range vastly, first of all, between children and adults. And they can also be very different for any two people, whether it's two adults with Asperger's or two adults with autism. No two people are going to have the exact same symptoms or functioning capabilities. So that's a good thing to keep in mind as well as we get going. And the range of symptoms are extreme. On the high end of the scale with extreme autism, it can even be non-verbal autism. People are very as dependents, they're not able to communicate even verbally. And then on the lower end of the spectrum, we have somebody who is a very high functioning person with Asperger's, and to you and I, it might seem like that is just someone who might be an extreme introvert because they function so well and may not understand. So that in this area, that is where there can be this tug of war and pull, because someone who seems really high functioning, that seems like there's no other reason for this distress in the marriage or relationship other than they're being a jerk, or they're being insensitive, or they're not being aware. And there's some parts of that, but there's some good understanding that needs to come out of that as well. So some symptoms that you might see, just a gamut of things, are person with autism or Asperger's, difficulty picking up on social or emotional cues. Maybe that typically you or I might see as someone who smiles or laughs. They find something to be enjoyable, humorous, and to that person it's really hard to pick up on, why is that person laughing? Why is that person smiling? When I talked to them, didn't understand what was going on with that other person. It's hard to read facial cues. There's also symptoms like finding it difficult in understanding how someone else is feeling. So besides picking up on social or emotional cues, but how someone's actually feeling. Person on ASD spectrum, they have typically very few interests, but those are very passionate interests. They're with high intensity. So whether it's things that they collect or activities that they do, there's very few interests, and anything out of that they're not interested in exploring. They just stick with their interests. Along with that, routine is comfortable. It's comforting, right? Beyond the normal interactions of routine that we all enjoy. But when there's something outside of routine, change is very scary. Other symptoms like noises, they seem amplified or even very painful to someone with autism or Asperger's. It can be, whereas you and I might experience someone dropping something, as a maybe a waitress in a restaurant drops some silverware. Oh, that was loud. But someone on the ASD might find that to be extremely loud and extremely painful, and that is just discomforting so much that their threat level goes up because that doesn't seem safe. And it's also extreme difficulty coping with interruptions, maybe from another person interrupting your work, or environmental sounds, surrounding sounds externally that come in. That seems very intrusive, interruptive, and again, it goes on with that noise thing. So those are just a few symptoms to highlight and look at. Why is this a concern, or how does this impact? Well, we ask why often because of a certain level of awareness, and whether that's self-awareness or pointed out to us from other person or group. This is a good thing. Keep that in mind. Being aware of this is a good thing. Our self-awareness drives our desire to make sense of this or to normalize our behavior. Like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I not feeling that way? Why am I doing this? Why do I not want to do that? This is a better, actually healthier interaction because we want to be self-aware. And it's sometimes maybe scary to be self-aware because we're afraid of what we might really discover. We may not want to know if that diagnosis that puts me on the ASD scale, man, that's scary then. Maybe we're afraid of becoming the next Rain Man and being impaired of our daily living. Whenever I hear people refer to autism, the autism spectrum or Asperger's, overwhelmingly, the majority of the time, people instantly think of the 80s movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. And that's scary to be thinking that I could be limited in that extreme way, right? That's an extreme example. Another concern of impact for us is our job functioning. I feel like I'm doing my job and I'm okay, and if I have Asperger's or autism, how's that going to impair me in keeping my job or being able to do work that I might want to find in the future? And of course, this comes into a concern as far as marriage and family. The emotional disconnect I might notice with my spouse, or difficulty empathizing with my kids when they come to me with their array of emotions, good or positive or negative. It's making sense of that. So that's concern. And let's go into the testing and diagnosing. Okay, Jesse, how do I figure this out then? Well, there are a few different ways. One is very simple. You can go online. There's online testing and self-assessments you can do that are free, and they can just give you a general idea of the possibility of where you might, the plausibility of falling on that scale. You can see a family doctor, right? Because just talk to your family doctor, be open, honest, and share that, and he or she can guide you and point you towards something that would be more specific in discovering that diagnosis. Talking to a neuropsychologist or a psychiatrist, they have specific medical knowledge in understanding this capacity specifically. And it's healthy to remember that any formal diagnosis for the ASD can only come from a psychologist with their PhD or a medical doctor, right? But what's next then? Well, if you do get diagnosed, follow your doctor's instructions and advice and seek counseling. Your therapist or counselor has specific emotional and behavioral knowledge to better understand what it is you're experiencing and how to engage with that as you are also dealing with symptoms and the issues of Asperger's or autism. And you can, through doing that with your therapist or counselor, you can learn how to develop emotional or behavioral skills, typically by using your cognitive strengths to interact and learn in these new skills. And finally, healthy thing to remember is this is not the end. It's just a new skill set that you're learning for a healthier you and or others you care about. So this is manageable. Don't be afraid to reach out and schedule a time to talk with a therapist to better understand yourself or a loved one you suspect with autism. Thanks, David, for the great question. This touched on an issue that is not often talked about or self-explored, but this can have a significant impact on how to understand certain distresses in our relationships or marriage, either by eliminating it as the factor or understanding it as the factor and learn how to manage with autism within the marriage. Thanks for tuning in for our discussion today. Until next time, be healthy for yourself by having some patience and grace as you learn.
Thank you so much for submitting that question. We love to answer your questions. If you have a question for yourself or a friend, you can submit it using our webpage and then look for the answer in an upcoming edition of our weekly e-newsletter.